I am so honored to be here.
Oh, thank you. We're honored to have you.
Tim, thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. I'm sure that there's a lot of excited people here. I know I am. I absolutely adored this show. I've just done my rewatch, obviously, as my research.
Oh, cool.
That was the only research I did. And as I was just saying, you know, just received 24 Emmy nominations, which is crazy. Crazy good, obviously.
Yeah.
Congratulations, including.
I'm gonna rename myself. I'm gonna change my middle name to Crazy, so I can become Crazy Good. So, thank you so much for that idea.
Yes, perfect. And of course, picture editing for is it episode 5, I think. Endurance
5, yes, please.
With Emily Mendez.
Yeah.
So yeah, a huge public sort of response and perception around the show. It's a very, very big show, but also a narrative that came from video games. Mm-hmm. I think most people, if you said, here's a show based on a video game about zombies, they might be not expecting you know, the level of intimate drama perhaps that we get from, you know, very intimate emotional drama that we find in The Last of Us. Maybe if you have played the game, of course, because obviously there is, we're coming from the skeleton there. So these ideas of something that's very big, a huge production, but always honing in on this, on the characters, on particularly the two main characters and their ever evolving relationship.
Yeah,
it seems like quite a challenge. Did the game coming first? Okay, firstly, let's get this out of the way. Was that ever a problem, a pressure? Did you play the game before starting on the show?
Yes. Well, here was the crazy thing. I was hired very late in the process, and so I actually couldn't play the game. Number one, because you can't buy a PlayStation 5 in America. Just impossible. So number one, I couldn't buy one, and I had 2 weeks to like get to Calgary to the production. And then I remembered that someone, a producer when I worked with Bad Robot with J.J. Abrams, had said to me, I worked as a producer there for a small period of time on a show, and he said to me, "Don't know too much. If you know too much, then you're going to try and you're even subconsciously you're going to emulate what you've already seen." And so I made this sort of risk. I took this risk, this calculated risk, to approach it from a completely fresh perspective, so that I was just editing the scenes as I felt they should be edited, because I also kept thinking that there's got to be a lot of people out there who haven't played this game. And if I just am servicing people who have played the game, then that's going to really sort of keep out a lot of people who might just want to enjoy a good story. And so my job was to really approach it from that perspective. And I was really lucky because, you know, Emily Mendez started as my assistant editor, and then she became the most amazing co-editor with me. And she had played the game. So I actually knew, and she said to me, I said, you know, I don't know, what did you say, Emily?
Hello.
Oh,
Tim,
wow, we got you, Emily.
Surprise.
So Tim invited me to crash the party.
I'm a crashing person.
Yeah.
So
That's fantastic.
What did you say to me?
I would just tell Tim, like, oh, these shots feel like the game, or like we were just trying to get elements in there from the beginning, because obviously Neil and Craig would have gotten them in eventually, but it helped us to kind of get things in there early on. So yeah, it was a good
way of it was a good approach, because I could do things, you know, in a fresh way, and then again she was adjusting me, and it became really easy for us to then work as a team.
And so you didn't feel beholden as such to the game with your first cuts, but of course you had Emily as your kind of cheat mode.
Yes, she was totally my cheat mode, and that's why I cannot possibly imagine doing this without her, which is why I had to sneak her in. So She likes wine. I like wine. We're having a good
Yeah,
time.
we're good.
I'm so happy you joined us, Emily. I really am, because that was actually the next thing I wanted to touch on. You just
okay.
mentioned, and it's a story we love at BFE, is people coming from, you know, assistant or other roles, and then getting the chance to edit and take that forward. And it really only ever happens, certainly these days, when you have an editor, you know, who is generous and supportive to bring people through. At least that's my experience. Perhaps there are some other stories out there that differ, but so you came on as an assistant, Emily.
Yeah, I had been assisting Tim for a few years at that point.
Okay.
Started on The Last of Us. So we had worked together already. We were a solid team where I was assisting, but cutting scenes for him when I could, because I had told him from the beginning that I want to edit. I love editing. And so really, when we started working together, I would just sit in his room when I was done with my assistant tasks and just like watch what he was doing, because Tim loves to teach. So I just would absorb as much as I could. So by the time we got to Last of Us, he knew I was ready to cut if I, you know, could have the opportunity. So we started on Long Time, and I was able to, he allowed me to cut, I cut the end sequence in that and a couple other scenes. And so that way we just had these scenes where we could show Craig, like, Tim is very great and would be like, Emily, cut these scenes. And so
I would always wait until he said, I love it.
yeah, true.
As if he would like, oh, well, we have to do a lot of work in this. I'd be like, okay, all right. I'll
Yeah,
fix
that's
that.
right,
So,
right.
but yes, if he said, and you know, guess what? He always said he loved it. So that was made it very easy. So,
Yeah.
Between that and then I was doing sound design early on, working with Craig closely with sound design. So we kind of had that relationship, and it just started to build from there. But you're right. I think it's very important to have an editor who supports you and will say, like, you know, my assistant cut the scene and they did this. And like, Tim has always been a huge advocate for me. So he's been huge for me in moving up. Yeah.
and you know, in terms of mentorship, like I was mentored and by an amazing editor, Norman Buckley, in the US, he was very generous, but he was also very rigorous with me, because he recognized that I had good instincts, but that I didn't have a good craft basis. And so he would just sort of send me back and continuing to work on scene after scene after scene, until I finally understood like what the craft was and why I was doing what I was doing, and making sure I always had a positive reason for making edits. And so I was really lucky to receive that kind of mentorship. And I remember when I got my first job as an editor, I vowed, I said, I'm going to do this from here on out, because it was really important to me to have someone do that. And so I'm very happy to report that all of my previous assistants are now editors, which is like really cool. And I love that. So it makes me very happy. And, you know, I don't believe that with the software being as cheap as it is, that it's as easy to learn the craft of editing now, because you can just, you know, you can just play around with it. Anyone can do it. It used to be that you had to be an apprentice. You had to find a mentor. Now you can just, you know, play on your own. There is a really strong craft that's been built over 100 years. And there's reasons why we do what we do. And so the ability to pass that knowledge on to as many people as possible is like literally it's 50% of my brain.
Yeah, I mean, as Cole Gowdy, one of our editors, likes to say to me, you know, anyone can string a few cuts together, but, you know, can you tell a story? Do you know what to do with it?
Yeah.
Do you know how to take that on and actually, you know, own it and make which is, you've been foreshadowing all my questions so far, by the way, but I want to dive into, Emily, you just mentioned Long Time, which you said was the first episode you cut.
Yeah.
I cried when I watched that show, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. It's one of the best hours. It's actually an hour 15.
Hour 14.
Hour 14, okay.
Well, I know exactly how long it is.
Yeah, sure. One of the best hour plus of TV. That's probably the best that I've watched this year.
Thank you so much.
And not the story that you expect to see on, again, like the perception of this show is not that you're going to see a story like that, you know, which is basically this wonderful romance between two men that, you know, would have been impossible before the outbreak happened.
That's correct.
They never could have got to that situation, because they came from different worlds and they had different backgrounds, and yet the nuance in the storytelling, I think certainly anyone who has any knowledge of this kind of queer relationship would see that. How was it for you? I mean, can you talk to us a little about cutting that episode?
Absolutely. And, it would be my honor to, because, when I was given that episode, I am a gay man and I have been in a relationship for 20 years. So I was like, when I read it, I go, I recognize the story. I recognize these characters. I recognize everything that's happening. And I also recognize that this is also a story about hope and about queer characters being able to have a happy ending and not a sad ending, which is so often the case. Our characters have to be lessons for other people. And in this one, I saw an opportunity for there to be a joy to their life, a life that they built together, that they lived on their own terms and made all of their own decisions. And so reading that script the first time, and again, like editors all know this, but we don't get the chance to really experience the episodes as other people do, as first viewers. So the only time we get that chance is when we actually read the script. And I remember reading the script, and the first thing I think is, oh my God, this is the best script I've ever read. And oh my God, I have to edit this. And oh my God, if I screw this up, I'm in real trouble. Because number one, it's like perfect for me. It's a perfect script. And then they had hired Peter Hoare, the director from the UK, who I've worked with on the Umbrella Academy. And Peter is a spectacular director. And then they hired these actors, Murray Bartlett and Nick Offerman. And a fun story is I landed in Calgary and Craig Mazin says, oh, I'm going to have dinner with a couple of people in a couple of days. Well, before we start filming, you want to join? I said, yeah, of course. And so I'm thinking, I wonder who was going to, his assistant and this and that. So it's Nick Offerman, it's Murray Bartlett, it's Peter Hoare, it's Evan Bolter, BSC, the cinematographer, and the producer and me. And he's like, yeah, because you guys, in my opinion, are my primary collaborators on this, and I want you all to know each other. So including the editor in that, I thought was such a generous gesture. And I really got to know everyone before going in, and it really motivated me quite a bit. So approaching all of those scenes, and when the day that we got the sequence where they have their first lunch and then he plays the piano song for him, was the most monumental day we'd had, because it was so. I kept editing it in such a way. I'm like, I don't want to edit. I don't want to make as many edits, because I feel like everything is playing in these beautiful, sort of two shots to keep them in the same frame together. And, especially when they're playing the piano and getting more connected. In the first part of the sequence, I recognized all of the codes that, queer people have, especially back then, to sense whether or not they're safe, to sense whether or not they're trying to suss another character out. And so I was very keenly aware of all of those little beats, and I kept adding them in because I felt that those beats were about sort of, it was something I could add that perhaps no one else could. And the episode was, about 62-page script, and it ultimately ended up being about 1 hour and 40 as the first cut. And I was so terrified because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in so much trouble now. They're definitely going to send me back. And what had happened, though, is that all of these little sort of negative space beats that we called them, where the characters were sort of feeling each other out, were ultimately the words of the relationship. So the words are still there, that the words are just not real. They're not dialogue. They're nuanced. They're senses between these characters. And so working on that was just, I love creating stories that I can control the way the pace unfolds, and as opposed to listen, sort of like, follow exactly how they did it on the set that day. So I they had performed that scene at the dinner table a little bit faster. And I said, I really want to extend it a little bit. I want, anytime they say something, I want to feel sort of the tension after they say a line to see how it's going to be received by the other character. And having both of them in the scene and saying, all right, well, this is not from either of their point of views. It's going to be from both of their point of views. And the arc of Murray Bartlett's character, Frank, is going to start from this playful sort of, I'm going to figure you out, to by the end, it ends with him going, oh my God, I can't believe it. I may be falling in love with this person. And so to see his transition over time was critical to me, because ultimately Bill starts in one place and he's in a place of hiding who he is. And then for one beat, he gets to share who he is, and he's never shared who he is. And to see how that affects Frank, it pulls him right into his orbit. And I just love using editing to be able to show how Bill takes, sort of a agency of the moment and kisses Frank back by using an edit, as opposed to letting that play in a two-shot. I said, I want to show the impact of Bill making that move. And then I want to show how each of those moments are so charged. So I cannot tell you how lucky I was to be assigned that episode. It just felt like it was destiny for me to cut that one. And I gave it everything I've known for my whole life. And I really wanted it to be for as many people as I could possibly make it for, because I didn't want it to just be identified just for queer people. I wanted everyone to feel this relationship. I wanted everyone to say, this is what love is. And thank you for allowing me to explain that. But that was my directive in my mind.
I'm queer too, so maybe my my judgment is biased, but my feeling was, when I watched it, this is a love story, and the other aspects are not secondary, because they are a part of the engagement, the coming together, and the reading of each other. I sort of see that the show is often about characters' vulnerabilities, and then the walls that they use to hide their vulnerabilities, and whether they can break through each other's walls or not. And we see that a lot with Joel and Ellie as the show goes on. And obviously that's a kind of concentrate, almost like certainly those early scenes in Long, Long Time are like a concentrated version of that, in a way, where they're Frank's testing out the wall and seeing if he can find a chink in it.
That's right. Yep. And
at first it's so subtle that it's kind of like, could this be, are they going, but, and of course that completely mirrors, I guess, that experience. I'm talking too much, but gets echoed again, but gets echoed in a way in the, I forget the name. Is it 7 that, Left Behind?
Left Behind, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a kind of almost an echo of that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that was a critical episode. That was actually the first episode that I brought Emily on to co-edit with me, because as a queer woman herself, I said to Craig, I said, you know what? I'm really busy right now. I'm juggling 3 episodes, because at that point, Craig said to me, I kind of want you to do them all. And I'm like, okay. So that's not really possible. So we had a couple of editors come in and pinch hit for us. Thank God they were there. But I did as many as I could. And one of the reasons I felt like I could was because Emily was with me and I knew her talent. And I also knew that she would be able to find the nuance in these characters that I would be able to. I might have done a good job, but I bet, and I know that she did a better job. And so I made sure that she had all of the biggest intimate sequences between them. Would you like to sort of talk about what that meant?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I loved the game, as we talked about, but the Left Behind portion was always my favorite. So when Tim was like, I want you to co-edit Left Behind with me, I was so excited. And again, we were working with this kind of slow burn of like, are they something? Are they not something? So we would put in there little details. Like, I know we when we could find details like of Ellie, like putting her hair behind her ear, like little things that make these people feel real. Like, oh, like she's kind of wanting to look a little nicer for Riley. Like, and so I just enjoyed getting to be immersed in this teenage girls falling in love storyline that I related so much with. And it was a beautiful thing to be a part of and to work on with Tim.
Yeah, and Craig was so generous to allow us to do that, because I mean, it's not often that a showrunner or producer can convince HBO to just be like, yeah, well, number one, he's never done an HBO show. And number two, she's really never been an editor. So she has, but not for us. And he was just like, nope, this is correct. This is the way we're going to do it. And I'll just tell them and they'll just all be quiet. So, and I'm super, and after we did it, you know, our calculated risk paid off. And then he said, okay, so you guys are going to do everything from here on out, right? And I'm like, that's right. So, and that's how it happened.
Yeah, we just kept going.
We just kept going because, again, we were behind from day one.
Yeah. Isn't that always the way?
It's always the way.
You know, circling back to public perception and public reaction, I imagine there was some unhappy viewers. Although these stories are in Bill and Frank's story is different from the game, but the characters exist in the game.
Yeah,
with the relationship established. So it's not. It shouldn't have. None of those things should have been a surprise to the gamers. I suspect there were a few people out there who were not expecting to see such queer representation on what they thought was a zombie show, but that's the way you roll, and we love it.
Yeah. No, and you know, I was very happy to see that negative response. Honestly, I know it seems strange to. I was like, yes, they are review bombing us. I love it. Which most people will be like, why would you be so happy about that? I'm like, it means that they're trying to prevent people from watching this because they know how good it is and how impactful it can be. So they're desperate to try and prevent it, which means that they care enough to try and stop people from seeing this. And that means that deep down, they understand how good it is and how important it is and how human it is. And that's why all of these sort of negative feelings, and anyone who gave me like a negative tweet or something like that, I was like, okay. So, and I mean, you spent a lot of time doing all this, which is good, because if you didn't care, I wouldn't have heard anything, but you do care. And you're and now you're worried that, oh, if people see us as the humans that we all are, how that could be really bad for you know, my TV Fox News viewing habits. So I don't know. So it made me happy.
Yeah, and at the same time, there was a lot of love for everything too.
Yes.
Like we've done a couple of events where people come up to us, like young students, and they come up and they're like, "We watch these episodes, and I saw myself in this episode," and that means so much more to me than the hate, and also like the beautiful fan art that we've seen. So,
oh my God,
there's so much beautiful response to it that to me that overpowers the negative.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
As you say, I mean, the fact that people would make a fuss at all means that it touched them on some level, and it's not in an insignificant way, right? Yeah. Because like you said, they have to care on some level, or they wouldn't have the reaction.
That's right.
I want to pivot slightly, although I feel like love is still the message, and bring in music. So you had a composer, Gustavo Santa. I'll get his name wrong. Sorry.
Santaolalla.
From the original game and many other things, of course. And you know,
yes,
it has a great catalog. But how did that work in the edit? Because the use of music is fabulous, I want to say, and of course, is this kind of emotional connective tissue. As editors always know, you know, the right music makes everything a bit easier. How did that work in the edit? Did you have music from the game? Did you have already producing stuff?
Yeah, so here was the great thing is, yes, we had the music from the game, and people were sort of like unsure, should we use the music from the game? Because the pilot episode ultimately sort of a little bit different. It's got a lot more action and a lot more sort of tension cues. And I believe the beauty, and Emily knows this as well as I do, the beauty of Gustavo's score is its simplicity and its sort of amorphousness and its loneliness, its understanding of their world. And that was the first time that score really came into its own, was in the Long Time episode. And so when I was scoring it, I was specifically just listening to Gustavo's things. I'm like, well, why wouldn't we use these things? These make sense because they're on a lonely road. They're crossing these sort of desolate bridges. It makes sense to have this sort of very simplistic sound, and the relationship itself made sense because there was a sadness to it over time. When Frank had become bound to a wheelchair, there was a specific cue I had found from Gustavo's work, which had this sort of feeling of autumnal sadness to it, which I really gravitated towards. So having all of those things at our disposal really helped us. And then once Craig saw what we were doing with Gustavo's score, and the HBO saw that first, HBO saw that episode before anything else. And they said, this is the score that we need to use. And Craig's like, well, good, because that's the score from the game. And I'm glad you like it because we have it all. And so it became a lot easier. And what Gustavo would do, though, is he would look at the episodes that we attempt with basically all of his score from the game. And he and his team would pick, and he's so generous, he would say, this works as is. And he would leave it. And Craig would say, I agree, leave it the way that Tim and Emily have done it. And when we saw on the dubbing stages, when they had done that, we were like, they didn't change it? Oh my God. So,
cool.
Wow. But then there were times when he'd say, I think I can do something here that I can pay off later, and I can pay off from here to there. And so that there were all these new pieces that were made with the original intent in mind. Specifically in the Long Time episode, when Bill and Frank actually go down the hallway to the bedroom right before they're going to die, I chose a piece of music from the very last parts of the game, which was when Ellie meets the giraffe. And I didn't know that was the cue from the giraffe because, I didn't know the game. And everyone else was like, that's the giraffe cue. And I go, oh, it is? I just felt that it was emotionally correct. Yeah. And I told Craig, I'm so sorry I used the giraffe cue. He goes, oh, no, that's the right cue. That's the one. So it doesn't matter. We don't have to be, slavish to what was done in the game. We can move things around as necessary. So it was really great to be able to work with Gustavo's material, but then to watch his team give us these new pieces just brought everything so much more life when we would hear it on the dub stage. There were just times when, for example, the strawberry patch scene was a new cue that Gustavo did. Beautiful. And we couldn't find anything from the game that had that much sort of emotional beauty and hope. It was all a little bit more desolate. So I had used something from, I forget what it was from. It was like from a Quiet Place, I think. And so I was like, oh, well, this is not exactly. And he's like, yeah, don't worry. I have something in mind. And so he created that thematic that then gets played later. So again, working with him is a dream because he doesn't necessarily score a cue for a scene. He builds a 10-minute theme. And then he says to us, here's the theme I did. And he uses like PVC pipes and all sorts of crazy instruments because his whole process on Last of Us was, I want to use found objects, things that are not, beautiful and modern or even like, available. I want to use things that would be found in this world to create the soundscape. So for us to be able to pull from those was really fantastic. And I know you pulled in the last episode stuff for when Ellie was born, correct?
Yeah, the thing about Gustavo's music is like it's so Last of Us. So I think that really helped us like with the show in general, because coming from the game, it's like what his sound to me, it's like it's so the game, The Last of Us.
Iconic,
So,
right?
yeah, it's iconic. And so anyways, yeah, we were always pulling, and I think breaking the mold of not using cues from specific scenes in the game really did help us, like Tim was saying. So yeah, we put the cues wherever we felt that they were needed.
Yeah, we didn't
So-
just go, oh, well, this is what they played in the game, so we have to put it there. It was fun to bring something that was different and to sort of collide things that may not have belonged in that specific spot with those sequences.
Also, also it's kind of iconic from the game is the sound design. I'm thinking particularly of things like clickers, but there are kind of many. There are kind of there's quite a bit of sound and sound design in the game, sound effects and sound design in the game, which are quite memorable to anyone who's played it, and they are there in some form in the show. Did you do temp sound design? How did that process work? Because I think it's amazing. I mean, some of those soundscapes are incredible, actually.
Emily is
a sense of atmosphere and dread, but also potential and all these kind of things going on with sometimes quite minimal sounds.
Emily is the sound goddess, and so I will allow her to talk about this because I am the music god and she's the sound goddess.
Yeah.
So
that's very nice.
Yeah.
For me, sound design was one of the things that really got me started working with Craig, like I talked about earlier. But the thing that really got me kind of in the mindset of what Craig was wanting, because he loves sound design. Sound design is really important to him. And we were doing sound design on the pilot. And there's a scene where this plane crashes into the town where Joel and Sarah and Tommy are trying to escape in their truck. And they wake up after this plane crash. So originally I had temped it where it was kind of loud and chaotic, like lots of screaming, lots of running, kind of what you would expect, I guess, for a temp sound in that moment. And Craig watched it and he was like, I want it to be quiet because it's scary when it's quiet and you hear something here, maybe in the distance, you hear something here. And that changed my whole approach to the sound design in the show, because the minimalist sound, when it's appropriate, it works so well. And so then in that scene, when they're waking up, you hear maybe some alarms, you hear some like people in pain, or maybe you hear a clicker in the distance, maybe you hear a gunshot in the distance, but it's these little details and it's so quiet that this tension kind of builds. So when I saw that kind of come to life in that way, that was kind of what we started doing for certain scenes, and just kind of keeping things, holding back a little bit. Like even in the clicker scene, when we temp that, it was like having moments be very specific. So, you could tell that there were 2 clickers in the room and that was all you heard. You didn't hear too much noise, and building in those little details, I think really makes a huge difference. It's really, really amazing.
And the word that we kept using was restraint.
Mm-hmm.
We said we don't want to coat the soundtrack so that it's like, ooh, scary, and it's sort of your expected level of scary.
Mm-hmm.
It was, and that was one of the things, the way that sequence after the plane crash was filmed, there were all these people going by, and that's what caused Emily to want to score it or to put the sound in like that. But then in the end, he's like, Tim, I want you to recut this in such a way that you don't see hardly anybody going by, so that we can change the nature of the environment. So that we can make it this eerie place that everyone is dead, and the only people who are alive are these sort of infected in various places that we don't know where they are. And not hearing things is scarier than actually hearing them, because it allows the audience to really focus on each individual sound. And specifically with the clickers, they were so specific with that sequence when the clicker fight in the second episode, that they spent, I don't know, 4 weeks making sure that sequence was exactly correct, to the point where they brought in the original artists that were the clicker voices from the game and re-recorded all of these sounds with them. And even Craig Mazin is one of the clickers. So because he's like, oh, it's it's like this. It's like, and you're like, oh my God, that's perfect. He's like, yeah, I know. So, and he's also, this is it's not a real spoiler, but he is the sound of Anna Torv gurgling at the very end of the second episode. the sort of the tentacles.
The tentacles are going down, yeah.
So because we didn't have her at the time, they're like, well, we really need the sound of her. he's like, well, let me do it, and can you please pitch me up? And so that's ultimately what became that sound. But that's just sort of Craig Mazin leads with sound. He even says I process things through sound, which is such a gift to as picture editors, because even though they say we're picture editors, I always think of it as we are the editors. We are the ones who are the keepers of the story. And the story is told using all of these strategies, all of these tactics, all of these arts. And you can't just say, oh, I don't know what to do with music here. No, you have to think about it. It's all part of the same thing that we all are trying to do, which is create this story, to use our skills and our art and our crafts to create the story that is going to have the most impact on as many people as we can. It's a wonderful thing that we do.
I'm just going to take a moment to say to everybody, please do put, I see that there are a couple coming in already. Please do post some questions in the chat, and we'll try and get some audience questions in before the end. I know
just if it's helpful, we have time. So
Okay.
if anyone wants to stick around, we
don't
have
want to
time.
we don't want to be too demanding.
Yeah, but at the same time, we're so honored that don't think of us as like, oh my gosh, there's nothing going on in LA. It's just no one wants to go outside right now. It's too hot.
It's very
As
hard.
long as everyone's having fun. I want to come to, so we've talked about, I guess, a lot of the little things, the intimate moments, and I do feel like it's a show that really brings you in to these kind of intimate, emotional character states. But there's also some huge set pieces, perhaps most notably Endure and Survive, which I think I've written it down somewhere. 9 week set build, 4-week shoot, multiple cameras, explosions, mutant, zombie, everything going on there. Can you talk a little bit about how you work with, and obviously the Emmy nomination? Can you talk a little bit about how you work with something that on that scale? Because I guess that even a lot of experienced editors may not have come into something on that scale before.
No, and I think that the way to approach these things, and that sequence is really special to me, because it was that 4-week shoot overnights, and everything went wrong. Of course, the run truck broke on the first day, and they didn't have a backup, and they're like, "What do we do?" Then it snowed in the end of May, and they're like, "Why is it snowing in Calgary in the end of May?" So we can't shoot tonight. So we can only shoot for 2 hours, and then it's gone. And then they had to clear the snow for the next day. It was insane. But the thing I'd like to approach, how I approach everything, is I just try and isolate all the pieces that are coming in. And so for every single camera, I built a selects reel. And from every single selects reel, I built a super selects reel. And each of those were part of my bin, so that I wasn't overwhelmed by all of the footage that was coming in. And the footage that came in from Jeremy Webb, who's a UK director who I've worked with before, who I absolutely adore, and Evan Bolter, BSC, the wonderful cinematographer who did that episode as well. I'm very happy to be working with British people. I love it. It's like one of my favorite things in the world. I love it. I was actually, side story, I got drunk for the first time in Saffron Walden, England. So, all right. Anyway, so in a cemetery. So when I was, of course, 15. Anyway, that being said, that sequence was so, there had so many pieces of film, and each setup was 4 cameras minimum, that I said to myself, I just want to point out all of the pieces that I think are going to be worthwhile for the story. And ultimately, I then worked with all of those pieces, and I built a skeleton from that. And then that skeleton, I understood then, was there were little sort of vignettes that they would film about certain things that are happening on other parts of the battle. And then there were certain sequences that were all about Joel up in his sniper's nest. And so I basically created all of these little sort of building blocks, all these little bricks that I was ready to sort of put into action. And then putting it all together, the really fun part of it was I did all that, and I was really happy with the sequence. And then Craig said, the thing about this is as good as it is, the story is really about Ellie and Joel. And if we can distill it, and Craig is wonderful because he'll say to me, I have a pitch for you. He'll say, what if you recut this in such a way that it's really a two-person scene? And I said, a two-person scene? He goes, yeah, make it a two-person scene. It's Ellie and Joel, and everything revolves around them. So for example, we had tons of material of Joel firing at the bloater coming out, for example, or all of the other infecteds. We had great material for that. But he said, ignore all that. Ignore all that and focus on how he's looking at Ellie and how Ellie is doing her own thing to stay safe. And we're going to really focus our backbone based on their connection, because in the story, this is the midway point, and we want to see how the character of Joel is starting to focus entirely on Ellie at that point, which is part of his character's arc. That at this point, he doesn't even think about anyone else. He's only concerned with what happens to her. So from that perspective, I was able to design the whole sequence within like a day, I think.
Yeah.
And then any little vignettes that came into play were the ones that we felt were the ones that showed the threat to Ellie's character. That, you know, this could happen to her. This could happen to her, and therefore it elevates the tension between what Joel is trying to prevent. So all of that said, I always laugh because when I look at that sequence, I love it so much, but it really is a two-person scene with 1,000 extras.
But by doing that, it kind of, I mean, it totally works. And of course, it pulls everything in.
Yeah.
So that this, I mean, you of course, in the wide shots, and you see all this kind of chaos or manufactured chaos, you see all this kind of craziness going off, but you're pulled right into this, even though they're physically separated, they're kind of being connected by this gun of all things, protecting Ellie as she you know, makes
absolutely. And it was all about those eye lines. It was all about making sure that their eye lines were connected over space and time, because spoiler alert, we picked up some of the shots of Pedro later, and we did them in a small studio in California, and we just basically had to make sure the eye lines were correct for every moment. So we literally picked out the points where we wanted to enhance the story between the two of them, and you can actually tell that you'll see that the rifle scope is a little bit less reflective in the pickup shots, because of course they weren't really there, but we did our very best on that. But that was the design. It was literally about these two eye lines to keep them connected, and to show how, you know, Joel is starting to really care about just protecting her.
And she effectively becomes his reason to carry on. Thank you so much. I'm going to dip into some of the chat questions.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sure.
Bear with me for a second.
No problem. Yeah.
While I work out how to scroll on my mouse.
Grab me the bottle. Bear with me. I'm going to grab some more wine. So, of course, it has to be on ice, right? Look at that. Look at that foreground. Wow.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful shot. It felt like the action scenes in particular were different to usual zombie shows, subtler and more nuanced, maybe longer cuts. Was there a deliberate approach to make the scenes more character driven right through the action stuff too? I think we've kind of just talked about that. But
we can also talk about the last episode, because that was a specific instance where we did that.
Yeah.
Specifically. And, you know, Craig said to us early on, I don't want this scene. And this is the scene when Joel enters the hospital and basically massacres everyone.
In a way, it's one of the most video gamey scenes, but it doesn't actually feel like the game does.
Right.
Yeah.
Kind of at all. Right.
Yeah.
And much more about Joel's state of mind.
That's correct. And that was exactly what we discussed in advance. Craig said, I want you to think about the internalized rage that Joel is feeling at this moment, that nothing in his way means anything. So it has no value to him. The only thing that has value to him is finding Ellie. So in that approach, Emily and I sort of discussed like because I had a musical idea that Craig had sort of pointed me towards. He said, find a piece of music that runs counter to an action sequence. And I said, great. So of course, he's smart enough to know that I'm going to find the exact piece of music that he's thinking of, and I did. And so we found this sort of operatic version of the main theme of Joel and Ellie. And so utilizing that as a structural backbone for the sequence, Emily and I said, well, what if we design it so it goes in and out of the sort of the real time sound? So we go into Joel's head a little bit more and then come out. And you hear these sort of the sharpness of the reality. And so that version lived for a long time because it was really about sort of the combination between real and internal. And on the dub stage, we just did an experiment. We said, what if it's all in his head? What if everything is internal to him? And we played that version and we were like, there's no reason to go back to reality. It should all play inside of his head, and music is the main driver of that. And so we ultimately decided that that is the way to showcase emotionally what's going on inside of Joel, because that piece of music that's playing counter to the action that you would normally expect an action sequence to have ultimately dovetails when Joel gets upstairs and starts to walk down the hallway with all of the sort of the animals painted on the walls. That dovetails beautifully into how much he feels like a father again. And he's going after his child. So all of that together made it very interesting for us tonally to track Joel's mindset. And once he gets in to the surgical room, we just took all the music out. And that was how we designed it. And it was always, action sequences to us were always character-based action. It was always designed like that. And even like the sequence with the Ellie's mom.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah, definitely. And just to say on that sequence, like the sequence of Joel in the hospital is such a good example of sound design as a storytelling device. Like whenever I'm doing temp sound design, I'm thinking, what's the story? What can I add to help the story? And so for the scene Tim just mentioned, where Anna is Ellie's mom is running to this farmhouse, we played a lot with the sound of this infected chasing her. You know, where is the infected? Does it sound super far away? Does it sound closer? It's starting to sound closer. So you're building this tension with sound design, and it's such a fun thing to be able to play with.
I think you mentioned somewhere before, or I caught somewhere before, you talked about a curiosity window, window, which I meant to bring up earlier, but I think you've already kind of talked about this idea, I think, of how you build up, tension and anticipation. I
love that.
Yeah.
So, and you know what it is? I'll tell you exactly what it is. It's the fact that I love to play with the audience a little bit sometimes as an editor, in that I want them to not see what the character sees for just a moment. Because then I believe, and I think a lot in terms of, I mean, I have to be, and all of us have to be, we have to be sort of the audience's stand-in. And so we sit there and I always say, well, what does the audience want to know right now? They want to know what's in the drawer that Ellie sees, but I'm not going to show them it right away. I'm going to show them seeing something and then go, what does she see? And then reveal it. Because then the audience is putting together this little mini mystery in their head. I bet that's the gun. I think that's the gun. So I feel like what it does with the audience is it allows them to be an active participant in sort of the mystery and the storytelling itself, as opposed to sort of spoon feeding exactly what is being seen by the characters at any given time. Because I ultimately feel like you're a little bit behind, and even if it's a few seconds behind, if the audience is or I should say ahead, if the audience is ahead of the story for even a second or two, that's a second or two that they can spend thinking about what they're going to have for lunch, who they're going to see later on. And so I try to sort of dole out things in a manner that allows the audience to have this little curiosity for just a bit, for just a beat. So anytime and it's like it's like the whole concept of the peeling away of the layer of the onion. You don't want to do it right away. You want to give and you don't want to be manipulative in a bad way where you're like going, ooh, you're not going to get to see that. It's like, no, you're going to get to see it. I'm always going to pay it off really quickly. But for those 3 seconds, you're going to go, oh, I wonder what that is. And so I just think about that all the time.
This idea of the mini mystery was something Tim and I talked about early on when we were working on Long, Long Time. One of the scenes that I got to cut was Ellie finding that gun and Frank's gun in the drawer. And so my first cut of it, you see the gun before, she's looking at it. So Tim was like, why don't you try this mini mystery where she sees something and then we see the gun. And it just like clicked in my mind, this idea of the mini mysteries and how effective they are. And so if you rewatch the show, we have lots of mini mysteries throughout. And one that I'm thinking of right now that's in Endure and Survive is the very end of the episode, which I was lucky enough to cut. And it's when Ellie walks out with this magic slate, that's Sam's magic slate. And they buried Sam, and she kind of kneels down and places this slate down, and you don't know what it says, and you're kind of sitting there thinking, and you don't see it until it's through Joel's eyes. And so that was something that came about when we were working with Craig, and the first cut, Ellie saw it. You saw it through Ellie's eyes, but then Craig was like, I want this to hit just emotionally a little more. So I was like, well, what if we just wait a little longer and then see that through Joel's eyes? So that is something that we play with a lot, and I love it. I think it's a really great.
It's just a slight information delay, and usually it's with an emotional piece of information as well. So something that has
I think all those things just pull the audience forward.
Yeah.
I mean, they do need it. What you were saying about because if you lose people for 1 second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, it's not just the attention lost, it's how long is it going to take to bring them back in.
Exactly. Yeah. And
it take another 5 seconds for them to come back. But if you're always kind of, it's not the same as being spoon fed, as you said before. It's more about creating this. There's always another thing
there's always another thing to wonder,
to learn, to pick up, right? And so that keeps us on the hook. And so you can take something that might in a cut another way feel quite slow, but it doesn't feel slow at all, because you're constantly being given new things to wonder and guess.
I feel like the audience wants to put puzzles together. I feel like that's what they really love doing, is to try and figure things out. So it satisfies that, I believe, and in the smallest little way. It's like, oh, I get to solve all these little puzzles, which feels, they're not doing it consciously. They're just they're thinking. Hopefully, we put them in a story trance where they're really just following the emotion of the story, and then this is just a tactic that allows them to continue to be stimulated and engaged as we go.
Yeah, to let them be an active viewer, and we love puzzles too. So we get that, and
So
Oh, there's a famous philosophy states that we often suffer more in our imagination than in reality. It's evident in the film Jaws, when the shark wasn't visible until 80 minutes into the film. Sometimes iconic POV scenes are forced out of necessity. Can you draw a parallel as to why we do not see the cordyceps in every episode as a result of restraint with intentional storytelling in the TV format, compared to an overabundance of cordyceps in the game?
I think that is exactly right. The intention from Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann was always the thing that's the scariest is the thing you can't see. And I can give you an example of that. The original pilot was about cordyceps. The first scene was about cordyceps itself and what cordyceps did. So we had this sort of documentary footage that was being, voiced over by, of course, like a David Attenborough character, about what cordyceps actually does to insects. And it showed exactly what they do. You can go find these things. It's very easy to find. And in the end, we all looked at that and said, well, that's showing exactly what it does. What if we don't show anything about what it does, but we tell you what it does? And it's not about what it does to insects, but what it could do to humans. And so that first TV, sort of 1960s TV set sequence was a reaction to not wanting to show the cordyceps in its doing what it does, because we wanted to just imagine what it could do. And I always thought, I was like, oh, this is fun. It's like a dialogue scene. I hope people are interested in it. And then then the response was like, this is the scariest scene in the whole thing. And because we made us think like maybe we will die. So because it ultimately hits that that feeling of again, internally, it's whatever is scarier is the thing you don't see. So similarly, that was sort of the whole process throughout, was to sort of hide them and to restrain them so that when they were part of the story, they had maximum impact. So when that bloater comes out, you go, oh, dear Lord, that is terrifying. The other sort of thing that was interesting with Craig is he didn't want them to be scary necessarily. He wanted them to be believably human. So in the long time episode, there's a sequence where Ellie runs into an infected underneath the gas station, and she studies it, and it looks not it doesn't look scary, it looks pathetic. And specifically, Craig asked, it's like, we should score this in a way that it feels human, and that what Ellie is doing is almost cruel, and it makes us wonder why she does it. And by episode 7, we understand why she does it, because that is a representation of the infected person that kills Riley. So, but at the time, it's this interesting way of showing that these are not necessarily just these evil things that are just to be wiped away, enemies to be vanquished, but that they were people at one point. And what we're doing is showing what happens to these human beings who have been infected. That's one of the reasons he loved using the words infected, as opposed to, they're not zombies. They're infected people.
Sure. And yes, my apologies. I shouldn't have been using the word zombie.
That's okay. We don't care.
Okay.
It's much easier to say, but that's why
But I guess in the popular consciousness, that's what people would relate. But it's I mean, and the whole cordyceps gives concept gives I don't know if legitimacy is quite the right word, but a plausibility that perhaps other takes on the genre don't have. That, as you say, is in makes it not an evil thing or a thing that's come from darkness, but it is actually more scary, perhaps, because it's just nature.
It's trying to survive.
It's nature trying to survive.
That's right.
Okay, a quick one. Were there any creative differences with anyone, as you never played the game and others may have?
The best part about working with Craig and Neil is that it's a conversation. And we all come to an agreement by the end. He's very open to hearing everyone's perspectives. He knows he's in charge, and will make the final call. But there were a lot of times where he's like, oh, I love what you did in this scene. And for example, in the pilot episode, I edited the sequence between Joel and Ellie where she's like, well, what the hell am I supposed to do? He's like, I don't know, you'll figure it out. And so it's their first sort of argument together. And I didn't know that in the game, it was edited in such a way that there was a lot of pauses between each line, that they were sort of trying to suss each other out in the game. So the way I cut it was very much overlap, because I felt it was very natural that when you argue with someone, you don't wait for them to finish their line. You want to get in your line really quickly. Yeah. And so Craig would say, oh, that's really interesting. And I love that. It's totally different. However, there's one piece from the game that I know you wouldn't know about that I want you to make sure gets in there. So when Ellie crosses Joel and says, your watch is broken, make it from this angle, because that's a really iconic shot from the game. And so it won't hurt the storytelling for people who haven't played the game, but for those who have played the game, it'll be a really interesting moment where they're gonna connect this series to the game. So having that, we really, there were no drag out fights. It was it
was more about finding the odd beats here and there where you
finding the odd beats and it
make them connect a little bit closer.
Yeah. Ultimately, I think what we got really lucky with is that our taste and the things that we valued were lining up with what Craig and Neil were trying to do. And that's a really, we're really lucky that happened and we got connected, because I feel like that was sort of a lightning in a bottle for all of us to have these conversations and to create the show in the way that they were hoping it would be.
Absolutely. Question about cutting, I think we've sort of covered this. Question about cutting complex action sequences specifically the bloater sequence in Act 5. Can you talk about editing a big set piece like that and the sort of skills those of us aspiring to do action sequences like that in the future need to develop?
I will sort of move to the bloater sequence actually and talk about that really quickly. But yes, again, if you could simplify what you're doing and just sort of go, all right, all of these pieces have value, and you figure out where those values are, and then you don't get overwhelmed by everything. So for example, the bloater sequence, what they did is Barry Gower's team, who's an amazing prosthetics person from the UK who did all of the Game of Thrones, the White Walkers, etc., created the bloater as a suit. And so we actually were editing with a character in a suit. And one of the reasons why that was important to Craig and to Jeremy Webb, the director, was that they wanted the reactions of all the characters to be real. They didn't want them to be reacting to, oh, and there's a scary guy over there, he's on a little tennis ball. So it's like they didn't want that. They wanted it to be a truly frightful appearance. But we also knew that we were never going to use it. So when we were editing the bloater sequence, they always gave us these empty plates that were going to substitute for what the digital bloater would actually do. But what it allowed visual effects to do is to see how the practical suit interacted with firelight. It allowed them to see exactly how all the little details that Barry Gower's team paid attention to on the suit. They could literally create a digital character that would match that suit so well. And so my job was literally, again, a two-person scene, a bloater versus Perry. And it was about the echoing of the character of what Perry would do to protect Kathleen. And he would sacrifice himself. So we're in a way, the stories are always about two characters and one sacrificing themselves for the other, because those are the echoes of what are happening with the Joel and Ellie characters. Is Joel sees that, will he have to sacrifice, what's going to have to be sacrificed? Is she going to have to be sacrificed for him, or is he going to have to be sacrificed for her? And so ultimately, all of those little echo characters are hopefully populating the audience into understanding that these are all the same basic stories, is what we would do for another person. And so that's how I would approach all of those action sequences, specifically the bloater, was how does Perry protect, the Melanie Linsky character of Kathleen? And what is happening in that sequence that allows us to feel that emotion versus just, an action sequence where there's cool things happening. Every shot has to have a purpose, in my opinion, for those things. And it has a purpose for a character perspective, and not just a purpose from like, ooh, there's like, things that are happening that are really cool looking. I go, every shot has value in terms of the character in the story. And that's how I would say to build action sequences. Eddie Hamilton from Top Gun and Mission Impossible talks about this all the time. He's like, my action is emotional. It is emotional, and I want the emotion of these characters to shine forth. And I think that's why, as editors, it's sort of our job as empaths and as emotional sort of surrogates for the audience to make sure that the emotion of those sequences is our priority.
Yeah, great answer. Great answer. Could you briefly talk about, this is a good question actually, and I avoided asking it earlier because I wanted to dive into the show. But I'm glad someone's brought it up now. Could you briefly talk about how you got to this point as an editor and began working on such exciting projects?
Oh my gosh. It starts with 25 years ago. Every job I've had has been a string that's attached from relationships that I've created over time. I'm very lucky that I knew Craig Mazin socially through my husband, who's a writer as well, who's actually on a picket line right now, sweating. And I love that. So it makes me very happy to know that he's out there suffering. And it's all great. But so Craig Mazin and I have known each other for a long time. And so when his Chernobyl show came out, he was at a dinner party at our house. He showed us the trailer and he says, I think I did something really cool. Can you guys look at it? I said, yeah, we'll look at it. We watch it. We're like, you're not doing comedy anymore. This is incredible. And I remember saying to him at that point, I will work on anything you ever do. I know I'm just serving you old fashions and wine right now. And I'm just the husband in the corner of all your friends. but I'm an editor, and I just put it out there. I said, I would love to work with you. And he says, well, maybe that'll happen. You never know. And so when he got The Last of Us, I called him right away. I said, remember what I said, that I would work with you? He goes, well, let's see. Let's see. You never know. And ultimately with Last of Us, I was not part of the HBO family. So they had their editors, and they wanted their editors to be on it. And that is totally acceptable. I understand that. But I kept pushing as someone who really desperately wanted to work on things that had that sort of that nuance and that character, because that's what I always do. Even when it's Gossip Girl or Fringe or whatever I've done, it's always been character based, and that's one part of what happened with me in terms of mentorship.
Well, I was going to say, people might see things like, I mean, there's a huge list of shows. If you go and look at Tim's IMDb, which is fantastic, it will make a great back catalogue for any streaming service.
Yeah.
But including such loved favorites like Gossip Girl and The OC, and those shows were really all about people being really emotionally bonded to these characters and invested in their emotional journeys. So in that sense, it's kind of all the same thing.
And that's what it was. The funny thing is, I said, I've been doing the same thing for 20 years. And I'm so happy that like now people are kind of like seeing it because of the spotlight that, you know, Craig as an amazing writer is able to give us. But I'm not doing anything different for The Last of Us that I haven't done for Gossip Girl, that I didn't do for Fringe, that I didn't do for anything anything I've worked on, whether or not it was successful or not. And I think as editors, that is what we do, is we bring ourselves, we bring our emotions, we bring our lived experiences to these projects, and we inject our lives into them as much as we can. Is it quote unquote invisible? Sure, not really, because our lives are baked into these films and these shows. Every time I see something, I always feel it. I always go, I can feel the hand of the editor in this, and I can feel the heart of the editor actually in this. And those are the things that I find are just so wonderful to see. And so that's, ultimately the way I got into Last of Us is Jeremy Webb, the director who had worked on Umbrella Academy, told me that they had an editing opening within in the last minute, and said, I really want you to be on this. So I really credit Jeremy for pushing to get me a slot on this. And then Craig Mazin was able to say, yeah, I second that. So that's how I sort of snuck in through the mouse hole in the wall. and then as luck would have it, our styles and the things that we valued and what we were doing with the material that Craig was writing, and what with Peter Hoare and Jeremy Webb and all the other directors and all the actors were giving us, was dovetailing beautifully in. And so we're very grateful for that.
Yeah, fantastic. You touched on the idea of the editor being the kind of custodian of the emotional journeys
Absolutely.
of the characters. I think this segues into the next question. Curious about both of your takes on editor as writer. Were there instances of larger restructures or deletions that you pushed for to make the story clearer?
There weren't a lot of deletions, to be honest. There were a couple in the third episode in Long Time, because it was such a long episode. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, there were certain sequences, and you can read the script of Long Time. Actually, it's available on if you just Google the script for Long Time, you can read the whole thing. And there were certain sequences between Joel and Ellie that were cut. Once we recognized how powerful the sequences between Nick Offerman and Murray Bartlett were, when we came back to Joel and Ellie, there were certain beats that were sort of arbitrarily about just them getting from point A to point B and what they would talk about. And they didn't realize at the time how impactful the Bill and Frank story was going to be. So once those things were recognized, it was easy for us to delete full sequences where it was just about getting from point A to point B. They talked about, oh, look at all the cars here. Maybe there's a battery in this one. They went into a room where the storage, sort of the bunker was, and they were like, well, we better not enter the wrong code or else we're going to get blown up. That didn't need to be there anymore.
Yeah, sure.
Because
Yeah.
those were not necessary, because everything at that point, and Craig said, like, everything at this point has to be based on how the experience of Bill and Frank affects Joel and Ellie. So let's delete everything in favor of that. So those sequences were deleted. I don't remember.
I mean,
much else.
ultimately, we were always working directly with Craig for those kind of things. And like Craig, it's always like working on puzzles together, like just all of us talking. And Craig will literally go and like write it like an adjustment to the script and come back and hand you like the adjustment. And so we were just always just collaborating directly with him for those kind of things.
Yeah, and and each piece of his script usually has a really strong story purpose, or a purpose for like, all right, we have to be, you know, very logical for how this all happens, and but yeah, there was not a ton that was for us to suggest to.
No, not really.
Really not.
No.
It was quite stunning. Again, we credit Craig as one of the best writers, and you know, he's just amazing.
Yeah, working with him is like a dream, and
It
his
really is.
editorial notes are fantastic. Like he'll give you very story-based notes that to us just make sense, and it's really fun to like take his notes and just give him something new and be like, "What about this?" And he'll be like, "Yes," or he'll be like, "Well, let's try this," and it's just a great process.
Yeah, he's a dream for an editor, because you know, so many of us have worked with people who are like, take 2 frames off the shot, and we're like, why?
Sure. And so it's much more about why don't you take things in this direction, or why don't you push it a little further here?
Yeah, my favorite note I would get was, I want this scene to be more harrowing for Ellie. How can we do that?
Yeah.
And I go, great. So
And it kind of, because it kind of gives you something to go on, rather than just, oh, I don't like this, or oh, cut that bit. It's like, why?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it still allows us to be creative too.
Yeah.
Like it gives us the ability to still be creative, do his note. And it's a great way to be. Yeah.
Yeah, as Craig would always say, it's like, I get to be the recipient of your genius. So
Yeah. Well, it's a sort of confluence of geniuses, isn't it?
there you go.
Question for Tim and Emily: how do you organize the work between you two? If you're working together on one specific episode, how do you split the actual editing?
Great question. We try to, I've always felt like you have to follow a storyline through. So when we would split up certain episodes, I would say, well, you need to take this full story. In episode 6, for example, I said, I think that you need to take the entire sequence between Ellie and Maria, who is Tommy's wife. I said, you need to follow that all the way through. So every sequence that has them in it is going to be something that you're going to make sure that you cover, because you're going to understand all of the pieces and the nuance that start at the very beginning of their arc and follow through all the way to the end. So a lot of it was based on designing ways to for each of us to take things all the way through. But then in the Left Behind episode, the trick was, oh gosh, there's only 2 characters in it. So what do we do here? So we had 4 wonders. Actually 5 if you count the escalator sequence. And so I said, well, why don't we just divide up the wonders? And I said, well, you have to do the big sequence where there's the dance and where they kiss, because I won't be able to do that as well as you can. There's no chance. So I said, you have to do that. And plus there was the other sequence that I said Emily has to do is the photo booth sequence, because that's where there's an intimacy in the proximity of the characters.
Yeah.
And I said, well, you're going to get this more than I'm going to understand this. And so we would split those sequences up. So I did the carousel, for example, where they're just sort of on the carousel, and it's sort of the start of the sort of fantasy of what it would be like with Riley. But I wanted to make sure that Emily had sort of the big meaty sequences between them. So that's generally how we would split those things up. But a lot, and then in the final episode, we kind of did it. I said, well, you should do out the birth of Ellie, because she loves Ashley Johnson, the actor. And I said, well, I don't know who Ashley Johnson is. She seems cool, but you seem to know her really well. And I said, you should do it. And she, of course, did, destroyed it. And then I took over when that sequence was done. And then I took over for a period of time. And I said, well, once we get into the hospital room or the surgical suite, you'll take over from that point. And then I will just do that very last scene. So we sort of designed the last episode in sort of we'll hand it off to each other.
Mhm, mhm.
And so some days, I would have all the scenes. Some days Emily would have all the scenes, and
Yeah.
it allowed us to well, not like I said, like we were always behind. So it's not like we were waiting for things. No, they were always sitting there for us. And so I'd say, all right, well, you take this, you take that, and I'll take that. And so that's I feel like, as opposed to sort of going like, well, let's divide up today's work. That's sort of not a good way of doing it, in my opinion.
Sure,
So
sure.
I'd rather divide it in terms of being able to take an entire storyline through all of its paces. And then, you working with Craig, he just has no problem going back and forth between room after room.
Yeah. And then when we're working, we do have a special relationship where we're like, we'll show each other our scenes when, like he's my first audience, I'm his first audience.
Yeah.
And
Always.
we'll be very honest with each other and be like, oh, well, I kind of felt this way, or I really like it, but this, like I think we have a really good shorthand of giving notes and just, giving each other that feedback that is important when you're editing and when you're first putting something together and having someone put eyes on it for the first time. So that's also something we did on all of our episodes.
And that's that's my thing, is there are a couple of BFE members who when I cut something, it's kind of like, before I show this to the director,
Yeah.
Yeah.
can you
No,
have a quick
sure.
look and make sure I haven't completely lost my mind?
Exactly.
And maybe they'll just suggest, oh, why don't you just tweak this or
Yeah.
whatever.
Maybe you lost your mind in a great way and you just don't know it.
Here we go. This is a longish one. There was a lot of emotion conveyed through tension and sound design, subtle actions like Ellie putting her hair back, as Emily mentioned, and holding on those beautiful two shots. Can you please speak to the process of the discussions in the edit room of building that style of restrained emotional conveyance? It was so beautiful and effective and so appreciated, at least by this audience member. This comes from Jack Brown. Massive fan of the game, especially when many productions insist on being more overt and deliberate with their messages to make sure the whole audience gets it.
That's an amazing question. For that sequence, I mean, a lot of what we are doing is gosh, this is a really good question, but I'm a fan of letting the audience do a lot more legwork.
Yeah.
Than being overt, and that usually works with score as well. I would much rather present something that allows the audience to do a little bit more investigation on their own, versus saying you should feel this.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what they should feel, honestly. I'm not sure. And there were times when we learned things watching other people watch our work. In the Left Behind episode, we actually watched that together with a lot of Emily's family and friends, and we had never watched it with an audience who didn't know the show. And once the infected character in the middle of the episode comes to life, we didn't anticipate how much everyone was scared for the entire rest of the episode.
They were so tense.
And so tense.
Yeah, it was a great way to watch it because it wasn't something we had experienced. But when we were cutting the scenes where the infected wasn't in them, we were cutting them as we normally would because Ellie and Riley don't know about the character. Why would we push? Because we've seen it, we know it's woken up, but then they haven't seen it. So we're doing the scenes as we normally would. But everyone that hadn't seen it was just on the edge of their seat.
They were literally like, oh, it's going to happen now. It's going to happen now. And we're like, it's not going to happen for another 10 minutes.
Yeah.
No, because every time they do literally anything, you think, oh, is this one of the, it's going to come now. It's going to be there. And you don't know. So it creates that entire.
We learned so much from that. But, again, it's like, I would rather be nuanced and subtextual versus being overt. It's just a value that I've always had.
So it aligns a lot with Craig.
It aligns a lot with what
it really
Craig
aligns
does.
with that. So
Craig will say, I don't want to put too much pressure on this stuff. Because I don't think it'll come off as we're trying to force something. And I don't want anything to feel forced. I want the audience to lean into the scenes as opposed to be, hanging out on the back of their sofas, being told exactly how to feel.
Of course, I feel like the casting with both Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey, they both have in different ways, but they both have an incredible ability to project emotion behind quite closed expressions. You know, there's not a whole lot of expression, and yet you can see that there's so much behind it.
Yes.
You know, the whole thing of Joel is kind of constantly, certainly for most of this series, kind of putting up a wall or closing himself off because he's so scared of opening himself up.
That's correct.
And loving this person. And then Ellie's got her own, you know, she doesn't want people controlling her and the rest of it. And so that works. I mean, the being able to work in a nuanced way with performers who are able to kind of give you so much with so little, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And, you know, I used to have to watch my dailies of Pedro Pascal like this. I'd have to go. Because everything was so behind the little micro muscles in his eyes. Because I'm like, what is he doing? So it's these little tiny nuances that I would have to really pick up on that he was doing. So people would walk into my room and say, do you have a problem with your eyesight? Are you okay? I'm like, no, I'm just watching Pedro's close-ups. So to make sure I'm seeing what he's doing. So, and I'm sure everyone's like, he's not doing anything. I'm like, no, he's doing something. It's just
there's always something.
Yeah.
There's always something that he's up to. But yes, but between that, I think, you know.
Yeah, our actors were all incredible. I mean, we were loving the dailies. Like I'd be into the story just in the dailies alone because they just were bringing it every day, and in the guest actors, just everyone. And it felt like the characters, like from the beginning. And
Bella was always making sure that Pedro was on his best behavior. Bella was always telling him, you need to shape up, Pedro, you know, because we're getting paid to dress up, and come on, you know, get it together. So I have to say, Bella, they're my favorite. I absolutely love Bella Ramsey, and any scene with Bella in it is always a joy.
Someone asking a question about Umbrella Academy. Sorry, I'm just reading on the go.
Sure.
I expected a superhero action series, but found such realism, characterization, and emotion that I was wonderfully shocked at the series and how you persuaded to let them cut it like that. Sounds like you've done the same with Last of Us being essentially a post-apocalyptic horror thriller and turning it into so much more. You also talked about persuading HBO to agree to let Emily edit an episode, well, co-edit several episodes. How do you get your own way in the creative process?
I'll answer that first. The way to get your own way in the creative process is to recognize when you have leverage, and you don't always have it. And usually you don't have it. Yeah. But when I do have it, I tend to try and use it because you don't always get it. So in that specific sequence of events, I recognize that Craig was really happy with Emily's work, and I was the work I was doing was being recognized by him. So I just said, you know what? The only way we're going to be able to, I said I can do it, you know, this next episode while doing notes on 5 others, but it's not going to have the same level of quality that you're used to.
Yeah.
So, or it's going to take me this much longer, and we already have 4 other episodes that have been piling up. So I just risked it. I said, what if, you know, she can come with me and do it? And so that's what I think, how you get your way is to put it in terms where the people who are making those decisions, it works for them. So
well, it's like when you get a note that you're not completely fond of.
Oh yeah.
You go back with a solution, even if it's not the solution they want. You say, well, okay, I see what you're saying, but how about we try? And then you just pitch actually what I want to do instead of what they ask.
I never like to say no. I always like to say, let's do it.
Yeah.
I say, let's see what that looks like. And then they go, oh, that's not so great. I'm like, well, what if we did it like this instead? So again, I like to try and sort of, even with working with other creative individuals, I just say, well, let's let them go on this little leash for a second and see if they figure it out themselves. I'm manipulating people all the time.
And if it doesn't, and then maybe we can bring a better solution or
For sure.
a more developed solution. If
Yeah.
that's
And in terms of Umbrella Academy, I will just answer that it's a similar thing, and I honestly learned this on Fringe, which had Anna Torv in it from Last of Us. And I knew exactly how to edit Anna Torv after 3 years of editing Fringe.
fantastic.
I believe Fringe was as successful as it was because it was a family drama that was masquerading as a science fiction. It was masquerading. It had the wrapping of science fiction,
Yes.
but it was really ultimately an emotional family drama. And so with Umbrella Academy, I looked at it in a similar fashion. And with Last of Us, it was almost the same. I said the thing that really bonds all of these characters is their history, their past, their emotional connection to each other. And so everything that I would do was always based on the emotion of the characters and how they would relate to one another under the wrapping of what it was being presented as. So it's almost like the post-apocalyptic thing is the wrapper of Last of Us, but the heart of it is a father-daughter drama. And that's, we would just lead from that and allow everything else to be part of the background. So that's, again, I've been feeling like that's the way to approach most things, because I feel like ultimately people want to connect to characters and relationships. That's the thing that we all understand. And that would be how I continue to do things from here on out, no matter what.
And I just want to speak to the earlier part of that question from the assistant side. So as an assistant, sometimes you're given this opportunity to like cut a scene for your editor and to like get feedback. Some people make the personal choice to not do it because you're not getting paid to edit, which I think is totally fine. I think it's a personal choice. For me, I was always from the side of like, I want to learn. I want to get better. I know Tim has a lot of knowledge he can share with me. And so from the beginning, when he was offering me scenes from when we started working together years ago, I'd be like, yes, I would love to cut that scene. And then I show it to him and I'd listen to what he's saying. And I think it's good to be able to show your editor what you can do. So if they get to a point where they have leverage, they know that they can trust that you can do it. So that's what I think is great for people that are assistants.
Bingo.
Yeah, I think people ask about opportunities in this industry, and there is it's often an answer. I don't want to talk myself for too long, but people often say, "Oh, well, I was very lucky," and luck is often a part of it. But you have to be ready to take advantage of the opportunity when it comes. Yeah. So if you're not doing those things, doing the little jobs, maybe that's a free job somewhere if you have to do that because you've got nothing else, or taking an opportunity to edit something where maybe you're not being paid as an editor, but you are getting the eyeballs on it and the experience in response to it, so that when that opportunity comes, you're ready to kind of say, okay, I can,
It's like you're investing in yourself. Yeah, you're investing that time. And even if you're not getting paid as an editor, you're still learning and you're gaining so much from it. There's a lot there to learn. And so I learned so much from Tim in those years. And it is a lot of things kind of colliding at once. It's like luck and timing and talent and all those things have to collide at one point for you to get kind of moved up, because it is tough. But I think it's well worth getting ready for that point in time when you hit it. So
what do they say? Dress for the job you want, not for the job you have.
How much time did they give you to edit each episode?
Well, on a normal schedule, they were very grateful to us, or gracious to us, I should say. They would give us 4 days to put together a first cut, the editor's cut, which is a lot. Normally on American productions for 1 hour series, we get 2 days after the last day of dailies.
But you're editing dailies as they come in, yes?
At first. For a long time. After that point, no, we were always just behind.
Okay.
But so on a normal, we'll use long time as the example. We had 4 days to put together the first cut. And then they were very gracious to the directors and they would allow them 8 days, which is 4 days more than would normally be given on a US 1 hour series. DGA rules say that you have 4 days minimum or to give to the directors, and usually those 4 days are all they allow. But HBO and Craig wanted the directors to have the ability to put together their very best work. So I remember working with Peter Hoare and on episode 3, long time, and I didn't hear from him for like 2 days after I delivered the first cut. And I'm like freaking out. So I'm like, oh dear God, who's he talking to? Are plane tickets being arranged? You know, are we out of here? So what's happening? And so I called Peter at the end of day 2 and I said, hey, how are you? I just want to make sure you received it. He goes, oh yeah, I received it. I'm like, and how did you feel? Oh, I love it. I was like, oh, I didn't know that. He goes, oh, I didn't tell you. My apologies. It must be my Britishness. I just didn't tell you. So, and I'm like, okay, fair enough. I've been spending the last 2 days trying to figure out what things I can
Freaking out.
lose. So I just like finally relaxed as the anxious American that I am. And we had those 6 days then to really polish and create a version of that episode that famously made Craig Mazin cry so hard it hurt him. He said, I was hurt. He said, ow, ouch. So he wrote about that. I was so happy when I heard that he was like in pain from crying. I was like, this is great. So, but that was the process for that episode. But ultimately, you know, when we were working on Last of Us, it became a situation where we were just always behind. And so working with some certain directors, like we worked with Jeremy Webb for a long period of time, because those 2 episodes that Jeremy did were a crossboard of a 40-day shoot. So we actually had about a good 3 weeks to work with Jeremy, which was fantastic. And Jeremy really dialed in all of those sequences. It was his idea to make sure that we followed Ellie's experience when Joel is being attacked by the boy in the laundromat. So Jeremy kept saying to me, let's focus on Ellie's experience. Let's not show what's happening. Because again, it was that same concept of, if the audience doesn't see everything, then they're going to wonder what's happening. So, and Jeremy was the one who really pushed me. He's like, let's do this. Let's make it more harrowing for our main character. And so those were the sequences we had, several weeks with. But then there were some episodes that had been in the can for many, many moons, and there was a director's cut, and we just sort of had to go and start over from the very, very beginning. Because Craig said, I want to see what you guys would do, which was a blessing, but also it was a little daunting. Because we said so many different editors have done different things here, and what if certain things are good? He goes, well, if they did good things, then great, bring those in. And so we would. So if there was something that another editor did, we didn't care. We just said, what's the best thing for the story? And is if their version is better, we're going to incorporate that version. So we tried to be as ego-free as possible.
Fantastic. I'm aware that time is rattling on, so please do hold your hand up and say, yeah, with the bottle's empty, and
the bottle is not empty. It's up.
Done now. But in
late where you are,
we're cracking on. Cole Gowdy asks, Tim, if you could flash back to 2003, what editing-related advice would you impart to your younger self? And Emily, if you could flash forward, what advice would you like to hear from your older self?
Oh man!
Oh my God!
I know, crazy.
I'm so excited about this. I know exactly what I would tell myself, which is, do not wait for your chance. You wait for your chance. The chance will not be given to you. You have to grab it. You have to ask people. You have to tell people what you want. Because I didn't. For 7 years as an assistant, I said, I'm just going to be very respectful and not tell anyone I'm going to do my job very respectfully. And hopefully someone will see that I'm good. And my mentor says to me, he says, why aren't you editing? I said, because I have a job. I'm an assistant, blah, blah, blah. And he wasn't the person I was working with at the time. And he says, well, you should be. And he ultimately jump-started me. And that's why I'm so grateful for him for jump-starting me and getting me out of that feeling of I should just be, mindful and wait. It's like, it's not about being annoying. It's about just letting people know what you want.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you let people know what you want, and you will find the people who you find are going to be the right people once you let them know, because you'll be able to see really quickly who is going to align with your desires. And so I'm very open when I talk to assistant editors. I'm like, do you like editing? Because if you like editing, talk to me. But if you don't want to be an editor, may not be the best place to be, because I'm going to want to rely on you. So that would be what I would tell my younger self, was to let people know what you want. And what about you?
Man, mine's tough, but I guess I would ask myself if I have a better idea of how to better balance family time and work time, because that is my struggle when I work, because I get so invested in everything, especially on the show. I was so connected to the characters and the story that I would go home and I would just be thinking of it all the time. And like, I would like to find a better way to have that balance when I go home and I'm with my wife and my dogs. Like I can like actually like be there, and that would be the only thing. But it's also kind of a gift sometimes, because you're so invested in the story. It helps when you're working. So I don't know.
Well,
if there's a little bit.
I know that thing though, when you're trying to crack something in a scene and you think, right, I'm going to knock off work now, but you actually don't stop. Your head's, even though you're trying to do something else, right? You're trying to go for a walk, or you're trying to go to the pub with your friends, but actually something in the back of your head is going, and then you go, oh, I've got it now, in the middle of the night or whatever. I know what to do. And so it's kind of difficult when you're right in the thick of working through those things, isn't it?
These films and these shows are our babies. We love them so much.
Yeah. Letitia asks, what was the biggest challenge you faced in editing the episodes?
Biggest challenge? Oh my gosh. Letitia may have just nailed us. I would say the biggest challenge for me personally was when certain sequences were filmed that were supposed to be funny that weren't funny. And so I had to make them funny. I will give you an example. The opening sequence of the 6th episode with the native couple was just not funny as filmed. And the timing was off for whatever reason. I don't know. Maybe, who knows? So, but I just said, well, these lines aren't coming out the way that they're supposed to. And none of it, I was putting it together normally as an edit, but then I was like, well, if I make this funny, if I time this out the way I feel like it should be funny, I'm going to be editing constantly, which is not in keeping with how the show has been cut to this point. And so if there's constant editing, it's going to feel inconsistent with the rest of the episodes. So the challenge I had was trying to create the pace of that sequence as a funny sequence where the dialogue sort of comes quickly and on top of one another without making too many edits. So there were times when I was splitting the frame in half and making sure the other half of the screen was faster. Or I had a triple split screen, I think, in that one. I had a triple split. So I'm like, well, we're going to have this one saying this one saying this, and this one saying this at the same time, so that they can jump on each other's lines. There were a lot of times where I would actually remove the pauses in the middle of, because, Pedro, we all know now, is just like super static. So I would take out the pause that he would have, and then I would do a fluid morph in the middle of the shot so that we could stay on him, but then the pace of the dialogue coming out would be the pace that I felt was the correct pace, so that we could be consistent with the rest of the episodes, but at the same time create the comedic pace for that sequence. So I'd say that was probably my biggest challenge. It took me a good day or so to make that work, and visual effects was very helpful to us. They said, we can do that. We'll
help you.
What about you?
For me, I mean, there's a couple scenes that were challenging, but one that's standing out to me that I haven't talked about before is in Endure and Survive. There's a scene where Joel and Henry and Sam and Ellie are all walking through these tunnels, and it's scary. And then they come upon this like underground settlement, and so then you're having this scene that turns from kind of horror to like wonderment. And once they walk into the settlement, there's a lot going on. We had a lot of footage of Henry and Joel walking around with flashlights, looking at different things in the settlement, of Ellie and Sam looking at comic books. And so that scene, there was just so much going on. And so when we first turned in a cut, we like to show as much as we can with like what footage we have. So we had like a longer cut where there was just a lot of beats. And so then when working with Craig, he was like, okay, well, our story really is with Ellie and Sam and their bond and them talking about endure and survive. And so once we kind of get that directive, it's kind of like pulling back on the footage of Joel and Henry searching the settlement. But I think sometimes when you have so much footage and you want to see it all, but you can't show it all, that for me was a little challenging.
Yeah, and not only that, but the flashlight was always either up or down on the table, and
yeah,
and so it's like, what do? We have a continuity problem, but gratefully you led from a place of performance.
Yes.
And a place of performance, and then you would just say, hey guys, we're gonna have to spend a little money to put this flashlight back up.
And they did.
Right.
The VFX guys did a great job with that flashlight, and yeah, we just went.
So it was a very clearly problematic piece of props that was not working for everybody. And we just said, let's lead from a place of character.
And we're not always sticklers for continuity. This is
No.
something that Tim and I have talked about. Like, we will pick performance and story over continuity. Always. But in that case, it was just so obviously like up and down. We did change it. But generally, we will allow continuity stuff to slide if we can.
Yeah. It's the old editor as magician work. How can we just sort of cheat and make sure that you don't see it?
Yeah, in there.
In there, exactly.
Chris Chow asks, says, I love Fringe. Did you do anything to convince him you were right for the job?
On Fringe?
You worked with JK before, right?
Yeah. I mean, I got Fringe after Gossip Girl, which was the weirdest transition ever. They were like, why should we hire you? And honestly, I just said, what I love about this is that it's a relationship show. And I really like the relationships. And then all of a sudden the two showrunners like sort of stopped looking down at their my resume or something and looked up at me. And I said, I really like the character of this. And I like what they do here. And I was just sort of deconstructing how the character dynamics worked. And that's one of the reasons why I feel like I ultimately got hired on it. It was a gamble on their part, which I'm forever grateful for, because that show was one of my favorite things to work on. In fact, it allowed me to understand how to edit Anna Torv in Last of Us, because Anna Torv has this incredible ability not to be able to say the word anything. She can't say the word anything, not at all. So she always says anything. So in her wonderful Australian accent. So she always says anything. And I knew this. So I have a bunch of NGs that I've stolen from Fringe, from her performance, that I just keep on,
you have an Anna Torv NG.
A couple of NGs. And then Anna Torv's first line in the pilot has the word anything in it. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me, you guys. So the first line she says is got the word anything. Luckily, she said it one time out of 17. And so I just stole the NG from that, made sure it was there. But in terms of Fringe, I mean, again, it was for me to be able to tell an emotional relationship story. And that's how I feel like I got it.
Quick question here. Are you going to Edit Fest LA?
I am. I will be there. So if anyone is there, I ran into Andy Morrison at the recent ACE event. So, and I see Andy right there.
Yeah.
There you are, Andy.
Yeah.
At least on my screen. So, and I was really so happy to meet him, to celebrate him for becoming a member of ACE. And anyone who's going to be at EditFest, my gosh, please just I'm very approachable. I don't know. I have a lot of social anxiety, so if you come up and talk to me, I'll be much happier. So,
sadly, not me, but yes, anyone else, please.
I'll see you there, Doug.
Network, interact.
Yes.
Have real world glasses of wine.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
Renee says the dog was quiet.
Well, he's not quiet right now. He's looking at us like, what the hell's going on? Why is this going on? Yeah, it's okay, buddy. You'll be fine.
So I think we are winding towards the end, because it's nearly 10 p.m. here.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. You guys, it's been our absolute pleasure.
I'm just scanning if there are any great questions there. Just lots and lots and lots of thank yous and virtual applause. And
we're so grateful.
for your amazing work. It's been honestly such a thrill, professionally and personally, because I am a massive fan, to talk to you tonight. And I'm so glad that you were both able to come on as well.
Yeah, it was my little secret.
Fantastic surprise, because it's clear that Emily, your contribution was very significant and important, and you're both really amazing team. And congratulations.
No, it's we're inseparable. It's fantastic. So thank you so much for inviting us to do this. This was such a pleasure. So
congratulations again on the nomination.
Thank you. I mean, I can't tell you how
we're thrilled.
We're just thrilled.
Yeah.
So
and I think unless admins have got anything to add, I think we've sort of
we're all there.
We've sort of run our length.
All right.